Welcome to the Default Profitable Podcast. You're listening to the next episode, and today we're going to talk about what it takes to start and grow and invigorate a nonprofit. We'll hear some successes, some failures, and some actual lessons from a real nonprofit leader. I'm your host, Matt Nettleton, and today my guest is Emily Krueger. Emily, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. So, look, we've talked a couple times. We've come to know each other. We've talked about our puppy dogs and our kids. Why don't you take 2 or 3 minutes and introduce yourself to the people that are listening, and then talk a little bit about what your company does.
Sure. Well, I'm really excited to join you this morning and share some of both my background as well as the story of bringing the 16 Tech Innovation District to life in Indianapolis. As context, I've had almost 3 chapters to my career. I started working in the political arena for Senator Richard Lugar and spent 8 years working in a variety of Capitol Hill and campaign positions. Following my time with the senator, I worked for about 6 years in a private equity-like capacity for a private company here in Indianapolis. And then I joined 16 Tech Community Corporation in 2018 as the second full-time employee. And so I've enjoyed throughout my career working in the public sector, the private sector, and always had philanthropic and volunteer opportunities in between. And so for me, joining 16 Tech Community Corporation was a way to bring all of that full circle. What we've been seeking to do is to create a clear destination for innovation and entrepreneurship in Indianapolis, principally through a placemaking strategy. And so that means our organization has been responsible for the physical development of 50 acres in downtown Indianapolis. That's historically the site of the city's water infrastructure. And we've done everything from acquire land, public infrastructure, self-developed projects to now recruit third-party developers. But importantly, we do so not as a real estate play. We do it as a contribution to economic development in Indianapolis. And so our team also oversees the programming of the district, which includes innovation and entrepreneurship resources, as well as workforce and talent and community development resources. So bringing all of that to life within the context of a nonprofit is something I'm excited to dig into with you more today. But the punchline is the experience that we've had at 16 Tech, and my experience in particular, is very similar to the startup or the entrepreneur and founder who we're seeking to support through the resources that we're bringing to life.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There is, yeah.
First of all, I think Richard Lugar may have been the last adult to leave Washington, D.C. So that had to be an experience.
Well, it was it just a life lesson and an incredible opportunity to work for him as a young person. He's the only elected official that I've ever worked for. But I imprinted on my experience with Senator Lugar and took some very clear lessons away from that time, lessons that have shaped my own leadership. And many of the things that I learned from Senator Lugar, I learned from watching him. They weren't lessons that had to be explained. They were ones that you could pick up on from the way he conducted himself. And one of the key lessons for me was that Senator Lugar really believed that a good idea could come from anywhere. And he would listen to people from all walks of life, across political parties, and was very solutions oriented. And that's something that has really guided me. And it's part of what inspired me and excites me about the work that we're doing at 16 Tech as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big name to throw out. So congratulations. Now, I think, so you threw out a lot at 16 Tech, and just so I can clarify it, there's really 3 parts to it, right? So there's the land development piece, the real estate part, and then there's the kind of community part, which is the events and then it seems like there's also the landlord managing piece to it.
There is, yes.
So you've been doing this. You started there in 2018. When did you really start taking on the responsibility of being the leader?
Well, I appreciate very much that when I joined 16 Tech in 2018 as the second full time employee, Bob Coy, who is president and CEO at the time, and the first full time CEO for 16 Tech Community Corporation, treated me like a co founder from day one. And the two of us were charged with bringing to life something that had been talked about in Indianapolis for more than 15 years. And candidly, the concept had a major credibility gap. And so we knew we needed to execute right away. And when you're a team of two, that means you do a little bit of everything. I joined as the chief operating officer, but I had no staff. So it was somewhat of a misnomer to begin with. And so from the very beginning, my hands were in every aspect of 16 Tech. And we have, in the last, now 5 years, grown our team as well as demonstrated proof of concept for something that's been talked about for a really long time. I now find that one of the things we have to remind people is we're just getting started. We're not done yet. What we have done and accomplished in recent years shows our ability to execute, our ability to contribute, but there's more to come. So, my leadership journey with 16 Tech has had a couple different phases to it. In those early years, it was helping to build the team. And then in my current role, I succeeded Bob as the president and CEO of 16 Tech Community Corporation in spring of 2022. And for me, that journey from going to COO to CEO has been one that I'm still in the midst of, but has been one of the biggest leadership challenges that I've also faced in my career.
So you worked there for 4 years. You watched it grow. You watch it grow. You've been hands on everything that's happening. When you think back to 2022, for the last 2 years, obviously we were coming out of the COVID shutdown,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're still kind of dealing with the sluggishness. But what do you wish you knew in 2022 that is surprising to you today?
When I reflect back on the last couple of years, one of the hardest things as a leader, especially in a dynamic organization, and then given the macro changes that we've all experienced, has been trying to hire the right people at the right time in the organization. And when I look back, specifically on the time horizon that you just laid out 2 years ago, one of the things that I underestimated was some of the resources that were needed to support our own internal team. So we had 5 full-time employees at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have over 20 now. And while in the scheme of things, that's still a small organization, that's a lot of growth. And what I've learned is that while the size of our organization might not merit certain resources, like a full time HR team or function, because of the dynamic nature of what we're doing and because of the breadth of the work that we do, it does warrant some resources that may not seem proportionate to our size. And so if I look back on these last 2 years, I wish that I had brought to life some things sooner that would help support the internal capacity and growth of 16 Tech Community Corporation.
Yeah, that's interesting because you look at it and you're like, well, it's only 20 people. How hard can this be?
Right,
But then
right.
you start to ask some questions like, okay, so how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you realize that 20 people bring 23 different versions of this.
Right, right. And it's interesting. So you described our work in 3 buckets earlier. I would offer that those 3 buckets are really the economic development function or the real estate development function, the entrepreneurial service support that we provide through spaces that we operate and programs, as well as the workforce and community development piece. So that those 16 Tech Community Corporation is like 3 in 1.
Right.
And we have no two people on our team with the same job title. So there's very little redundancy that's baked in. Some of the spaces that we manage and some of our team members were first hired through third-party partners that helped us bring some of these spaces to life in ways that we've effectively vertically integrated in the last 2 years as well. And so that means even things like technology systems, there's been a real challenge to integrate. And what excites me the most right now is based on some of these lessons and learnings, we're really focused on developing what's the 16 tech way, not the Emily way, not the Matt way,
Right.
but what is that 16 tech way in terms of how we conduct ourselves, how we interact with our partners, and that experience that we provide. And that's exciting to me, both in terms of our ability to realize our mission, but also what it means in terms of creating a culture for our staff.
And, it, so I will tell you, the biggest companies that I've interviewed have been the ones most concerned with the idea of culture for staff. Like it's been interesting to me that the companies that you would think, well, they got so much institutional momentum, like they'll just, you show up, they give you the manual, you do what they tell. But they're worried about, how do we get people excited to come in? How do we get them engaged? How do we get ideas from anywhere? The things that you kind of talked.
Matt, just sticking on that for a quick second, I mean, I really do think there is a misnomer at times that we talk about resources or challenges as a function of scale of company. And what I've found working in a small, dynamic startup nonprofit is that we still have need for change management. While there are some things that on face value might seem easier because you have a small team, what that means is oftentimes you don't have the discipline around project management or other processes. And so people can implement things with speed, but what that oftentimes means is the success is dependent upon the individual. And so one of the things that really motivates me is ensuring the continuity of our work and and as well as the sustainability of the organization. And that means bringing on resources that help make it easy for people to know what's their job and how to do their job. And culture is the condition for which all of that thrives. And so for me, it's just as much a part of a small organization as it is a large one. The size of the ship that has to be moved is very different, but just because it's small doesn't mean that there isn't complexity or at times difficulty implementing things.
Well, and I would kind of say that actually the size of the organization being small means that if one person decides to go off on a wild hair chase, you don't have anybody else doing that job. So there's nobody like keeping it stable. This person goes off in a different direction. The whole company's following them. And so having
That's true. That's true.
processes and having a system that requires people to understand what their job is and how it fits in with everybody else. One of the things that we train our clients on is that there's 4 roles for a leader. And the number one most important role for a leader is to recruit people to the company's mission and vision. Not just recruit new employees, but the people that are already there, hey, here's how you fit. Here's why you're important. Here's what we need you to do. And here's how you impact everybody else. So.
And even for people who have been with our team throughout the last 5 years, there's a constant need to remind
Yes.
and feed that as well. So again, part of the lessons and for me is a recognition that even though someone might have been on this journey for the last 5 years, there's still a need to remind them of how their role has evolved and what's expected of them now. And because of the nature of our work has changed, that also means that there are things that people have done in our organization where they've been successful, but that it's now time to hand that off or it might not be something that we need to be doing at this stage of our growth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, yeah, just that, just that recognition that you've got to constantly recruit and you've got to, help people evolve. And even you evolved from 2018 to 2022 so that you were ready to take over then. All right.
Yeah, Matt, one of the if I reflect on some of the biggest lessons over the course of my career, I mean, early in my career, I was successful largely because of an ability to deliver on projects. And so for me personally, I'm motivated by work. I like big, hard challenges, and I like working towards audacious goals. And what I've had to be much more intentional and thoughtful about is managing people and building the relationships. Um, and and in my role as president and CEO right now, it, the next step of that is the focus on the culture. I mean, my role is really to help set the conditions for which our team can be successful. And that's just as much about recruiting the right people as it is about making sure that we have the tools and the resources that the team we do have has to be successful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really interesting to hear you talk about this because, again, one of the things that we see is people get into that CEO role and they start hiring people and they pay those people a lot of money, but the CEO doesn't give up any of the tasks. And so they pay an awful lot of money to hire people that are not allowed to do the job that they were hired for or use the talents that they have. And it sounds like you may have escaped that, but I would be willing to gamble that the exposure to Senator Lugar probably played a little bit of a role in that.
Yeah, I'm smiling for those who are listening and can't see. I reflect on this deeply and think about it. It's something that I have awareness for, but oftentimes what it means is I realize I've held on to something too long, and I see the consequences of that, and so it helps me hand things off sooner. Going forward, so for me, it's still very much an evolution. If I reflect back, early in my career, the question was, can I do something, right? When given a challenge, it was, can I do this? And at this stage of my career, the question is, should I be the one to do this? And so it's making sure to pause, ask myself that, and then really lean on my direct reports and trust them to build their teams in order to be able to get the work done. And in a small organization, that's hard because there are a lot of things that I roll up my sleeves and get done. I'm the longest tenured employee of 16 Tech Community Corporation. So if someone doesn't know something or where to find something, it usually is in my brain,
Right.
Or in my email or my files. And so again, what really motivates me, and tying this back to my experience for Senator Lugar, is the idea of building capacity within institutions, right? I'm very motivated to contribute to 16 Tech Community Corporation, but I'm also motivated to make sure that this work continues beyond me. Hopefully, I'm part of it for a very long time.
Right.
But it's not about me, and that's something that I learned from watching Senator Lugar, and that's part of why I'm also motivated to build up the capacity of our organization, still to be a small and mighty team, but one that is able to sustain, in many respects, independent of who leads the organization.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And I asked you about a book earlier before we got on, but have you read the book Who Not How?
I have, yes.
Which is what you're describing.
That's one that I purchased, admittedly, in this period, which you've highlighted from 2022 to 2024. And yeah, that in many respects sums up this shift that I've been making from COO to CEO. And that's a catchphrase that stays in my mind and helps check me at times.
Perfect. Yeah, which is a great lesson to be able to say, hey, I definitely want to know who should do it. And I will start with the assumption that it probably shouldn't be me.
Yeah. Matt, I'll also share, and I'm very appreciative of my direct reports, some of whom have been with me through this transition. And they also wave a flag at times and will say, hey, Emily, um, I've got this, or you don't need to go that deep, or slow down. And so for me, it's been wonderful to have people on our team who can also reflect a mirror back to me at times. And I'm excited to continue to watch their growth and success. But that's also been an important part of making sure that I'm moving through this transition in a way that also empowers the people who are around me.
Yeah. So when you sit around and you have, a glass of wine or a beer and you're with friends, and one of your friends says to you, hey, I'm thinking about leaving my corporate gig and becoming the president or leader of my own company. How do you describe the difference between working for somebody else and being in charge?
Well, I married a serial tech entrepreneur. So um, in our friends and family, it's hard to stop us from taking charge of things. It's kind of the culture that I've grown up in, is one of a lot of both responsibility and a lot of drive. Um, and so, I've talked with this about my husband, I talked with my husband about this, and I find that the decision points that I'm asked about for friends tend to be ones where they're shifting, from a large corporate job to maybe something that's a smaller organization. And I do think there's parallels between this. Should I start a business versus should I go work for a nonprofit or in a different sector? Obviously, there's some different risk profile and things that are associated with them, but those are really fun conversations to have, and ones that I get to have around the dinner table as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's a different world. Sometimes they just don't realize it. So,
And Matt, it's also interesting because our mission at 16 Tech Community Corporation and our success in many regards is defined by our ability to help foster and grow the startup community.
yeah.
And we do so in a way with a lot of intentionality to diversity. It's still really important that people recognize that part of the startup experience is failing fast.
That's
So just because there are places like 16 Tech that exist, it doesn't necessarily mean that every idea or company that comes through these doors is going to be successful. But what it does mean is that we can provide the resources to help validate that idea faster, perhaps with less upfront capital, in ways that allow a founder to pivot or to find the resource that they need to ultimately be successful. So, I think that's also part of what I acknowledge, especially in working with first time founders or seeing those who are interested in exploring entrepreneurship, that part of it is the reminder that failing fast is part of what that entrepreneurial journey means.
yeah. Yeah. All right. So, if 2024 Emily could go back and sit down next to 2022 Emily the night before you take over as CEO, and you could say, hey, listen, it'll all be okay, but here's what you concentrate on first. What would be the first thing that you would focus on as a leader?
When I reflect back, let me tell you what I was focused on first, and then um, I think I had some of the right priorities in mind, but had to iterate and find the solutions to them. So, 2022 Emily knew very clearly she needed to focus on making the transition from COO to CEO. And I also knew that I needed to build a team around me in order to do that, in addition to having put some personal resources like coaching, et cetera, in place. Um, in 2022, I was also very aware of the need to secure additional operating funding for our organization. And so that meant articulating a vision for 16 Tech that complemented our real estate but did not rely on it. So, how are we adding value to this ecosystem beyond just space? And so, those were the 2 to 3 things that were really important for me. And I look back and I think, in many respects, those were the right priorities. One of the biggest challenges has been, in some ways, the speed to execute those, being in a small organization. And if there's the biggest thing that I would go back now with hindsight is to wave the flag and say, just because you've been in this organization for 4 years at this point, your viewpoint is going to change as the CEO from the COO. So still give yourself some time to assess the landscape from this new vantage point, because the way you see things or the solutions you might identify are going to change as a result of the different perspectives. So I think I had the right things in mind, but what I underestimated and what I would now tell myself is, is your vantage point's about to change. And so you've got some good hypotheses, but give yourself an ability to see things from this new perspective before you jump to make decisions.
Yeah, that the idea that you still may have something to learn is super vital. So, all right. Any closing thought you would, I mean, that's a quick 27 minutes. Any closing thought that you'd like to give to somebody who's a relatively new business owner leader or an aspiring business owner leader?
One of the maxims that's in my mind almost in a daily basis and in each conversation, and that really helps me right now, is to be curious um, versus critical or before critical. I think oftentimes in a leadership role, sometimes when you learn about something, your first reaction is, well, why is it this way versus another way, right?
Right.
And there's a temptation to think that that means maybe it's not right, or and for me, I've just found that the more curious I can be, that helps me in terms of interacting with others, and it helps me see things from a different perspective. And so that's something that really guides me right now, is the idea of being curious first, asking the question, and then oftentimes that helps me be in a position to understand how a certain solution was arrived at. But I find that to also help with overall setting goals and pacing too. And that's something that I really carry with me on a daily basis right now.
That's a great lesson. I mean, yeah, well, and the way I was taught it was you probably shouldn't tear a wall down until you realize why it was built. So, because hey, that wall looks stupid. I'm going to take it down, and all of a sudden everything collapses. So, all right. Well, I think we can wrap up there. There's a lot of good lessons about learning and the importance of team and growing. For our listeners, there's going to be information in the show notes about Emily and how you can reach her and how you can learn more about 16 Tech. You can go over to defaultprofitable.com. Also, as a listener, there's 3 ways you can help us grow the podcast. Leave a review wherever you listen. Hit subscribe wherever you listen. And if you hear an episode that you think is kind of interesting or cool, share it with somebody else that you think would find it interesting or cool. Emily, thanks for being a guest. I know it took us a while to set this up.
I'm glad that we did, though, and I just appreciate the conversation this morning, and also appreciate the way that you think about leadership and the variety of contexts, and an opportunity as a nonprofit leader to be able to share what has also been an entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, it really has. Hopefully people see all the different sides that you've gone through. So, uh, well, we'll be back next week with another episode of Default Profitable. Until then, stay focused, keep working, stay profitable.